This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 122. Jori Ford. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 122 of Experts in the Wire. My guest today, Jori Ford, is currently Chief Marketing Officer at FoodBoss, which is a food delivery search comparison engine. But prior to that, she was Senior Director of SEO and Content at G2, among many other prior roles in SEO and marketing. In addition to her vast SEO, content, and marketing experience spanning over 15 years, Jori actually has a very extensive engineering background as well, and also experience in how search engine algorithms work. She has been a speaker for Search Summit, Tech SEO Boost, and SES, and a Search Engine Watch columnist. Our conversation went super in-depth and covers a lot of topics like advanced crawl budget and crawl optimization, why it is possible for SEOs to both be technical and creative, some really interesting ways for how to learn SEO, and a lot more. So I hope you enjoy episode 122 of Experts in the Wire with Jori Ford. Jori, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Dan?
I'm excellent. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to jump right in and chat a little bit about your engineering background, because I think it's really awesome. There are some other SEOs that have started in engineering, come to SEO, and now you've even moved on to CMO, which we'll get to. But can you tell me a little bit about your specific type of engineering background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off as a front-end engineer. I started my own company called AEP Design back when I was in college at Purdue. I wanted to make some side money, and I'll age myself a little bit. MySpace was cool then.
Yep.
So being able to do some front end with some JavaScript was a really big deal. And then my first kind of part-time job I found on Craigslist with Box 7 Media in Chicago. And that's when I kind of bridged front end and back end because I started learning a little bit about PHP. And so that really started the core of my engineering background, understanding how the front end communicated with the back end, being able to build out the middle tiered systems to communicate. And I really never got into like database structures and things like that, but it was a wild ride. I'll say that.
How did you then get into SEO? And this might be obvious to some people, but in what ways did your engineering background help you as an SEO?
Absolutely. So I had a client, very early stage, who my cousin hooked me up with because my cousin was in the music industry, and a gospel singer, Terry McConnell. I'll pub Terry real quick.
Yep.
Asked me an interesting question. She said, Jori, I love the design, but why don't I show up for a gospel singer in my area? And I didn't know the answer. And like any good SEO, before they knew they were an SEO, the first thing you do is you start searching. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of information around search engines. So I ended up in some forums and got a better understanding of how people were getting placement. This was when keyword spamming was really cool,
Yeah.
So early stages of Google, AOL reigned supreme, things like that. And once I got a good understanding of the fact that it was the overall structure of the page, I realized that, my engineering background, my ability to develop the web page was going to make it easier for me to facilitate. And then from there, when I talked about Box 7 Media, I actually worked with Bob Rosenthal, who his first, kind of rule of thumb for me was, as you look at this front end engineering stuff, that's great, but I want you to be mindful of how you present information, because the information presentation matters to the user and it helps them determine how to choose you. And so he was the next big step in how I understood search, because he said, I don't want you to take on black hat tactics. And I was like, I don't know what that means. So he actually sent me to Black Hat Forums and then sent me to a boot camp with Jerry West, who I'll plug there too, not the basketball player. Jerry was one of the first people to do testing networks, and he had a network of sites and openly said, those of you who actually understand how to build a website, you're going to be much better off than those of you who don't.
Yeah.
And I took that to heart. and was able to learn quite a bit from the boot camp and understand, how content was applied to the different tagging that I was using and how it, interfaced with metadata. But then really, I guess what drove me was being able to connect PHP front end and realizing that I could create scale. I could automate things. And that's when, blogs started to become popular. It was the first stages of WordPress.
Yeah. So that was around like 2006 or 7 or so that you're referring to?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And maybe the opposite question is, was there any ways in being an engineer that hampered you doing SEO, right? Were you thinking too technically? Were you not thinking about the content as much? Were there any negatives to that?
That's a great question. I just left off with saying automation. People who know me now would say I'm an automation and scale junkie almost. I look for the ability to scale a lot. Early stage, that was probably something that hindered me quite a bit, only because I understood how keywords function and I understood that I could stuff. So when you can and you can automate, you do.
Yeah.
So I learned really quickly the difference between white hat, black hat, and what people will now say is relatively gray hat, because I could build inclusions. I could automate things that we think of as, bad today, like content spinning, were just normal to me as an engineer, because I was like, why would I spend time writing when I can automate it?
Yeah.
When I could snatch content from other places, splice it together, and make it seem, relatively legible. Didn't make a lot of sense to me to put a lot of effort into doing more.
Yeah. So, and then, you spent quite a while in SEO. That was like mid 2000s. And then just recently you stepped into a CMO role at FoodBoss, which we'll talk about. But how did you then transition from SEO to CMO? I don't see that quite as much. I mean, it's interesting. You went from engineer, technical, right, to SEO, which kind of bridges those, to now marketing. How did you make that step, and how did your SEO background help you step into CMO?
Absolutely. Okay. So that's a interesting question, because as an engineer, I realized I didn't really love backend as much. So I stayed in the front end quite a bit, and then kind of leaned more into the web design aspect of things, which led me to a role as a web designer, a front end designer, and then shifting away from the development entirely and into design. So it tapped into some of my creative, but I realized I was very visual and structured in my approach. So it still wasn't, what other people would call art. Mine was all about symmetry and placement, which led me to a place where I realized I needed a fine-tuned balance. I wanted both, the science and the structure. I wanted things to have some rigidity, but I wanted to be fluid inside of that.
Yeah.
And so that really helped me explore content. And I realized, how much I had hindered my ability to develop and articulate my voice online. So I went into content marketing quite a bit. And so content plus SEO plus the engineering background allowed for me to do some very unique things, in that I could work with designers, I could work with engineers, I could do the front end code myself, but I could also pinpoint the way to automate. And that really just kind of drove me towards performance. All things kind of aside, I realized that I could focus and hone in on areas that I could specialize in, but I was much better and a more formidable SEO when I listened to the other people around me, collaborated with them in a unique manner, and that ended up resulting in me being more of a product manager than anything. And when you start taking on the role of a product owner or a product manager, you start realizing all the intertwined pieces.
Yeah.
And when I was at my previous role to being a CMO, I was at G2. I really had that product owner hat on, and I did user interviews. I'd worked with the marketing team, hand in hand, and realized that I was missing a big piece of what I really wanted to be doing. Because for me, the voice of the customer mattered so much more than I think I had even realized. And I started to explore more of the creative aspect between the content, the user, the product, and my engineering background. And I just happened to be able to do SEO while doing all those things.
Yeah.
So that led to my wanting to take a next step into being a CMO.
What would you recommend for, say, the SEO listening to this podcast that's thinking, maybe I want to learn a little bit of engineering? Is the typical going to one of these websites like Code Academy, or like, is that a good route? Is there something else a little less obvious that you'd recommend for somebody wanting to learn some engineering?
Yeah, I would say that SEOs get hung up on just the front end aspect of it, which I think I was very fortunate to have insights into the back end. If you don't understand how the back end and the front end communicate, no matter what kind of guidance you get from the Google developers guidelines, regardless of if you take one of the boot camps, you don't understand how SEO can be applied methodically. So I would say if they want to, segue into engineering, learn the front end, definitely understand the tags, things like that. But more so, take a step into a deep engineer, back-end engineer's, role, and pair with them. You don't have to actually learn back-end engineering, but learn the systems. I think somebody that we all really, admired in the industry was Hamlet Baptista.
Yeah.
And Hamlet understood the back end. He understood automation and scale. He understood how the back end communicates to the front end. And that's what really makes up enterprise SEO. It's understanding the patterns and the communication between the two areas and expertises within engineering. So I'd say if you really want to learn SEO and take a dabble in technical, start with something like Python so that you can understand back-end languages. And
just to clarify for some people, or a reminder for some people, front end being more like CSS, HTML, right? And back end being more PHP.
CSS, HTML, JavaScript are all going to be considered front end unless you're more advanced with the JavaScript. Back end, you're going to be looking at things like .NET, Python, understanding databases. If you learn SQL, you'll understand some back end as well.
Yeah. So Food Boss, this is where you're at now as CMO, and it's technically a search engine, right? Can you explain a little bit like what Food Boss is and where the search engine component comes into play?
Absolutely. So Food Boss brings together all areas of delivery and pickup related to restaurants. And so we have our own crawler. A lot of people will try and refer to us as an aggregator, but we get our information sources the same way Google does from a variety of places. Google can tap into XML. XML is still just a feed of data, which is what an API is. Crawlers are just ways of extracting information from web pages. We do that today for restaurants. We do that with third parties so that we can surface for users the best, I'll call it a deal, best deal, but their best opportunity for reducing their costs, their time, and becoming most convenient in understanding how can I get something delivered, when can I get something delivered, where can I get it delivered, and how much is it going to cost me relatively to get that to my place. And what we differentiate in as a search engine is, I think Google's taught people a lot over time, right? Data used to be cached. You used to sit there and have to deal with old data.
Yeah.
And we've seen these search engines evolve into almost real-time results.
Yeah.
And that's what we actually do. We give real-time results on what's available now after scouring the web to get you the best offering.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to look across a bunch of different marketplaces to understand how a restaurant can get food to you. You just come to us and we tell you.
And when we chatted before this interview, you mentioned how a lot of people look at Google and they think it's magic, right? Even as SEOs, we supposedly are trying to understand the algorithm, but then we look at a result and we're like, how are they doing that? But you were mentioning that it's not magic, it's a system, right? So Can you break that down a little bit for people? Like, in what ways can we think as SEOs, more of Google, like just a set of functions or systems rather than this magic black box?
I mean, Google's done a really good job, I think, of laying out their systems for us, right? They told us, we crawl you so that we can extrapolate information. We index you. And when I think of index, I try and tell people, think of an Excel spreadsheet or think of a database. It's just a place to store information.
Yeah.
So if Google's sending out a crawler, it's just someone to gather information. It's a survey, right? They survey your site, they collect information, they put it into their database. Then rendering, that's probably the biggest piece of the algorithm that people are kind of like, oh, wow, aha. But we as people think of things very simplistically. A query is just a question. So if you asked another person a question, that person's going to kind of go back into their brain, which is their database, think of all the information that they have, and they're going to try and pull out what's the most relevant to answer you. Google's doing the same thing within its systems, and then it creates constraints that you actually provide it. And so do, billions of users over time. They take those constraints and they restrain them, refine them, and present that information as best they can. And if your input tells them that that information isn't appropriate to you, i.e., you click a result, you go to it, you leave it really quickly, bounce rate, right?
Yeah.
All you're doing is informing it that I don't like what you told me. And so then if you didn't like what your friend told you and they didn't give you correct information, what do? They go and they try and learn a little more, get a little better, and bring it back to you. When I think of how Google does that in its systems, it does it locally, right? On a regional level. It does it nationwide. It does it by industry. We've seen that. You go to real estate, you get one kind of result. It's almost okay to spam, in real estate.
Right.
But you go to publications and information, and it needs to be unique. It needs to have cited sources. So really, it's just compartmentalizing those systems. It's saying, I have different databases for different industries, for different types of information I want to surface to you. And I'll also take your inputs and synthesize those into ways to filter information for you.
Don't you think, and I'm going to be a little rhetorical with my question here, that SEOs debate ranking factors too generally, right? And you just broke it down, like real estate being different from content, being different from local. Isn't it a lot of, and I'm speculating here, but what are your thoughts on like Google operating more upon things like topical classification or industry classification, and not necessarily going, oh, links are working here or not, but maybe like you said, in real estate, they are adjusting certain factors up or down based upon that situation.
There are things that I think a lot of SEOs are unaware of that relate to an algorithm. Google has industry-based algorithms. They have time-bound algorithms.
So what would
they also have human input into their algorithms. They have rater quality guidelines from human raters. So I would say that we do tend to try and generalize a lot, but there's a lot of specificity. And if you think about how engineers operate, how a product team operates, and I'm going to give a hypothesis here, but I would say that each of the different areas has different teams that are assigned to them. So the algorithm is made up of subsystems of algorithms. That's why we think they're so complex. But if Google says something like we have 200 algorithmic factors, what if you just broke that down and said it's 20 different teams?
Right.
20 different teams with their own 10 unique inputs that they can weight the way that they want. And then a surface layer on top of it, like a cloud Band-Aid type thing, where all of those algorithms then need to interface together on the interwebs. Well, in that instance, you would see why there's so many varied results, because different unique teams have their way of trying to elevate, their component of the algorithm.
Right. And that's the other component of like, it's not magic. These are people the human
These are
being. It's
people
why you
making
see
decisions,
Yeah.
mathematical decisions, input decisions. They're all variables and factors going into a database. Even the human element, like even when you do a search, you are part of that interface. You're a new data point going into it, being calculated over time.
And I mean, this is why, just down to the level of like, we see core updates not on Christmas, right? Like,
right.
Because these are people pushing software updates essentially.
Yeah.
Live.
And rollbacks.
Yeah.
We've seen Google announce an update and then do an oopsie doodle and roll it back because it wasn't good enough.
Right.
And where do they get the information from? You've never seen Google roll back a core update or even a minor update unless the industry complains.
Right.
Another input.
People. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about this? So I have this idea that you mentioned going back to database and thinking of the index as like an Excel spreadsheet. Do you think, I have to imagine that Google keeps in their index records of the content on a URL, almost like an archive.org. But do you think Google keeps like a historical record of what was on this URL across all the different dates and different changes, right? To be able to connect the dots between maybe what this page originally was and what it is now. So if you're making content updates or even doing a bad redirect or something like that, I mean, I would have to imagine there's a scale issue maybe with that. And this is my curious mind wondering what you, as somebody that works in engineering and with search engine technology, what's your take on that idea?
So I would say, I think of it as like a hybrid approach. I think Google has a cache, right? The cache by definition is a stored version of your page. And they tell you that they update and they break cache. So as an engineer, like what you're hearing is there is a storage system. What we don't know is how long it keeps it, but Google's told us that it references other sources over time, right?
Yep.
Think about Google Maps. When Google Maps existed pre-Waze, there wasn't real-time updates from human beings. Post-Waze, there is.
Yeah.
So hypothetically, you can think of all those same kinds of systems. If we have an archive.org that's storing historical data, what's to say that Google's not extracting data from there so that they also have the historical data?
That's true.
So I think to your point, absolutely. Over time, I think that Google looks at the evolution of brands because there's a reason some brands do better than other brands. They put in the effort, and Google's told us that it looks at, frequency and recency. So how do you keep tabs on frequency and recency without storing the data to some degree? You may not keep a fully cached system of all of the page, like a rendered version of the page, but like, how hard is it to store 100 bytes of words and a timestamp?
Right.
It's not.
Yeah. I think that's one thing SEOs often forget to look at. Like, let's say you have a page on an e-commerce site that's having a hard time ranking. So I had this situation where, let's say it's shoes. It wasn't, but as an example, let's say somebody's trying to rank for, shoes for sale or something, but you'd go back and that URL actually used to be socks, right?
Right.
And so there's this mismatch of the historical content, all the backlinks that used to lead to that page, and now what the page currently is, and that's confusing to Google. So I think as SEOs, 100%. We should be going back and looking at old pages if you've got this situation where something's just not ranking. I see that as maybe, an opportunity.
I mean, we see that with forensic SEOs. Like people did not know what a forensic SEO was for the longest time.
Yeah.
And now it should be common knowledge. And if it's not, I urge you to cover it in another podcast.
Yeah.
Because Jenny Hallis is an amazing forensic SEO.
Oh, she's been on the show.
The thing is when you look at the history and the change, the easiest and simplest way to teach new SEOs to understand why it's important to know the history of a URL. When you buy an old domain,
right?
We all know you can buy an old domain that has a crap ton of links associated to it and still not rank. And we've all kind of unearthed that it has to do with the relevance of those links.
Yeah.
The relationship literally is interlinked. It's funny to say that, but it's the truth.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about crawl budget to dig a little more technical into Google. You spoke about this at Tech SEO Boost in 2019, which we were both at, and somehow I did not meet you. But that's okay. At least we met now. I wanted to begin.
I'm a huge fangirl of yours, so I'm glad I'm finally here.
I appreciate that. I did want to begin at the beginning. How does Google see crawl budget? You kind of set up the presentation with that. So how does Google look at crawl budget?
Well, think about resource constraints as an engineering team. Like I really urge people to think about the humanity of Google. It's really funny for people to hear that, but they're human beings working and doing their best, right? And everyone's got resource constraints. And so you have to prioritize your resources. Even when you own your own website, you think about that. You're like, how much effort do I want to put into this section, the about section on my website versus the homepage? And we all know where our efforts go. It's the homepage, right? And so Google's doing the same thing. It gets this first glance of us and we're like, hey, Google, here we are. Got all these pages of glorious content and information. And it's going to try its best to get as much of it as it can. But there's you, and then there's the 40 billion others online that also want a little bit of this time, a little bit of these resources. And so the very first time you build out your XML sitemap, you build out your website structure, is really that first time that you're inviting Google to see how much you have for it to ingest.
Yeah.
And so it does kind of this first slurry. A lot of people I've seen recently complain about Google knocking their website out from overcrawling. And it's really because Google's trying to gauge how much effort is it going to need to put into you. And that's really the definition of crawl budget. It's how much do you have? How much does Google need to extract from you? And how easy are you making it for them to do that? And then how much demand is there publicly for you as well?
Right.
And the combination of that calculates out to how much effort. And a lot of engineers use what's called the ICE system: impact, confidence, effort.
Yeah.
You think about Google doing the same thing. What's the impact that them crawling is going to make on you? What's the confidence they have that the information that they're going to be able to source from you is going to be relevant? And what's the effort that they have to put into it?
Yeah.
If you can mitigate risk to the effort, make them very confident because you have lots of good information to ingest, and it's going to be impactful because it's in high demand, your crawl budget expands. Part of that effort has to do with the servers that you're using as well.
Right. And what's a way that as SEOs we can think about measuring for crawl budget, right? Are we thinking about percentage of the site per day, a number of raw number of pages per day or per week? Like what's a good starting point there?
That's a really good question. So I would say the easiest way to look at it is, and I'm going to try and really oversimplify it. You got your money pages and the rest of the site.
Yeah.
Okay. And the way you should be looking at your crawl budget is the percentage of your money pages. So calculate the bytes, calculate the pages themselves. And so total out the bytes and those URLs, and is 100% of your money pages being ingested by Google? Is Googlebot visiting them compared to the rest of the site? And with the same frequency that you're updating it. And if it's not, you need to optimize for your crawl budget.
Right. Which we'll get to. And you mean bytes, literally BYTES, like the size.
BYTES.
Okay. Not like them biting at your content. So, and I like how you break a lot of these steps down, because we do think about just crawl budget as one thing, but you talk about demand, and then I want to get to conserve, optimize, and expand. So is crawl demand, is that something separate and distinct from crawl budget? You talk about that a little bit in the slides.
Yeah. So crawl demand is definitely a big difference, because we as users create that demand. Google is reacting to the demand of the market. And that's why the algorithm and crawl budget go hand in hand. If people are looking up, we are living in this right now, right? COVID.
Yeah.
Okay. The demand for COVID was so high. Google developed an entire product around it. But where did it get the information for the product? That's the part that people don't think about. The product itself was just an interface within search.
Right.
But it was in such high demand that they allocated their resources to gathering it from news sites, anybody who was posting on it, data resources from universities.
Yeah.
All those places got prioritized within their crawling schedule.
Yeah.
Because realistically, you have to think about it. These things are scheduled. It even tells us in Search Console that you can request to be in a queue. So you already know that there's a laundry list of URLs that it's planning to crawl.
Right.
So the higher the demand is, the more likely you are to be crawled. The lower the demand in the marketplace, the less likely you are to be crawled, which means that you need to increase your impact within that market.
So this is interesting. So a couple things here. By demand, I'm going to speculate and say maybe you mean like search queries, right? And then number two, one thing I've always believed since way long ago is I've always thought of brand search volume being some sort of quote unquote ranking factor. That's my speculation. But through this conversation, maybe brand search volume creates demand for your site, which then increases your crawl budget, gets you crawled more, and then maybe that in turn is an input into your ranking. And again, that's speculation, but I think
you're spot on with your speculation because Google actually says it in its guidelines. One of the very first things, whether you're looking at the beginner guidelines or advanced, Google tells you focus on making people aware of your brand.
Yeah.
Right. So they tell you to do external marketing because they want you to influence the market enough to help them get the data points to say that you're in demand.
Yeah. Interesting.
You're right. I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But yeah, I've always, and I'll have people contact me or clients or whatnot say, hey, why are we not ranking? These other sites are beating us. And I'll pull up search volume of their brands, to compare. And that can sometimes be very eye-opening to people because they can go, oh my goodness, you
have to create demand in the marketplace for what you have, or there has to already be a problem that you're solving. And that's why so many of the SaaS products that come out today that are solutions oriented do so much better because they're solving a problem that already exists.
Right.
So there's already demand.
Right. Some of the funniest client situations are when I've worked for a SaaS company and they're like, there's no market fit yet for our product, or there's no way to describe our product. And I'm like, okay, so what are we working with here? Because if you don't have a term that people are using to find your product, we've got to get them in another way.
Absolutely. It's part of branding, right? Every good brand marketer knows that if there's this fine line between creating the uniqueness of the product, but deviating so far from what people know that they'll never use it.
Right.
So you have to create these triggers and these mechanisms to get them to use the brand and to use the solutions the way that you need. I think product marketers just praise them because they feed new language into the marketplace to create demand to surface new search results. But if you can't do that, then you have to piggyback off of something that exists today. And that's where content marketers and SEOs, we find our bread and butter, right? Because we live in between the questions people are asking.
Yeah. And just to finalize on the crawl budget stuff and circle back to that. So you have ways for people to improve this: conserve, optimize, and expand, right? So I'd love to know what those three distinct things are, and then maybe a couple quick tips on each one of those.
So conservation is minimizing the risk to Google crawling something you don't need, right? Get rid of the crap. Focus on the money pages, and that's how you conserve. And then optimize is really honing in on where you want Google to be. Your site architecture has to do with that. Your internal linking structure. We talk about these things kind of in a vacuum. We throw out all this language, but people don't really know how those dots connect. Well, the fact of the matter is you either give Google a table of contents or you give them links, which still mirrors your table of contents. If it doesn't mirror your table of contents, it's confusing. Nobody says, hey, you want to know the way I want you to start reading this book? Start in the middle of the book, go to the front, and then finish off at the end and leave the, the last 10 pages before the last two. Those are going to be the ones you read.
Yeah.
right then. You're like, what? It's too much confusion.
Yeah.
Google is a system.
Yeah.
It needs to be able to follow a system, a pattern. So optimization is all around setting up a framework and a pattern that allows to Google to follow your system.
Yeah.
Create your pattern uniquely to yourself. And now it allows for you to really measure your crawl budget in association to what they're crawling. You get to look at your log files and go, hey, I told Google I only want these 100 pages crawled, and I excluded everything else. And I'm not telling people to do this experiment, but I am telling people to do this experiment, right? Create 10 pages, cut off 5 of them, and ask Google not to crawl them at all. Huh. If Google crawls all 10 and then you cut off the 5, what you should see is a focus on the 5 that you have. Now, if you want those last 5 that you cut off to get recrawled, just put links to them. Don't include them in the sitemap. Don't include them anywhere else. Now see what the trickle down looks like. Are they getting crawled as frequently, as deeply, as quickly?
Yeah.
Right? It's all these little incremental components of learning. That's the optimization part.
Yeah.
And then the expansion, well, Google openly says that it doesn't want to crash your website. Right. That's why the very first, like a lot of the people that are complaining right now and they're like, oh, Google crashed my website. Well, are you looking at how you set up your CDN? Are you opening the floodgates and telling Google that you can handle it? Because Google's going to give you as much as it thinks you can handle because it's trying to learn all of this.
Yeah.
So now that you've cut it off and said, don't crawl everything, you've optimized and said, this is what you should really crawl. Now, open up the floodgates just a little and say, I'm going to give you more bandwidth to expand your ability to crawl the things that I want the most and more until you reach a cap. And now you know that you can move on to adding new stuff to your system, new pages, new information.
I'm going to share a link to your slides in the show notes too at evolvingseo.com/wire because the slides are awesome. I think there might be a video from 2019 Tech SEO.
There is me walking through how I found a lot of the findings, why I think it's relevant, and what people can do to kind of replicate some of these things, because it's not hard.
Yeah, I'll dig that up and I'll put that in the show notes too. Just one last thing on the crawl expansion. So I think you mentioned CDN, Content Delivery Network. Are there other couple common things you can do to expand crawl budget? Yeah, so there are a couple things outside of your CDN. A lot of people use rate limiting currently. Mm-hmm. Rate limit everybody except Google. Oh, okay.
Right? Like it's kind of simple in that.
And do you mean literally like
the other aspect of it is,
sorry to interrupt, but like SEO tool, like limit SEO tools, other bots, like literally everybody.
All the other bots. Yeah. Like if you really want to focus in, and I'm not saying for everyone, because if you're optimizing internationally, Google's not the only bot in the playground. But if your real big focus, especially if you're a small business, is getting better rankings than Google, you have to give Google more space to enter your website.
Right.
And so in most cases, upgrade your hosting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get on a virtual private server. Make sure that the ability for your page to respond, because speed is a big part of this too. If your page is slow to respond, Google assumes your server is slow to respond.
Right.
So we all think speed optimizations is only about users. No, it's also about not knocking your site off the web so that your business can still survive. But if you can afford to be on a faster server, deliver faster, Google's going to crawl you more.
Yeah. For rate limiting, is that in robots.txt or is that depend upon?
Usually that's going to be at your server level hosting.
Okay.
So a lot of times larger sites, for security purposes, will do rate limiting because Google's not the only bot that's hitting you to extract data.
Right.
And so for them to ensure that bad bots aren't trying to harvest data or even do like an infiltration and steal, like an exploitation. CDNs do rate limiting, security systems do rate limiting. But at the end of the day, your CIO and your CTO are the ones that are informed as to how you're rate limiting, why you're rate limiting. And if you can get them the information that they need to tell them that, Google's a good bot. Because you can do things like Google identifies itself by IP. So when Googlebot hits you, you can actually request it respond back with its IP address. If it's a Googlebot address, open up the gates.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times rate limiting is just keeping that gate up because you just don't know.
Yeah.
But if Google announces itself and makes it known, let it in.
Yeah. One thing I used to do a little bit before was pull log files and pull spoofed Googlebot IPs. Is it good to block those? I was doing that for a while, and I always kind of go, is this really worth it? But is that the kind of also the blocking you're talking about?
Yeah, that's absolutely worth it, because if you can block the bad IPs, now you have more bandwidth for the good ones.
Yeah.
And so you can whitelist all of the Google good IPs that you get referenced back because they respond back. And then you can block the bad ones.
Yeah.
Because really the reason you're blocking all these things is you're wasting your bandwidth and your money.
Right.
But if your money pages need more love, shouldn't you spend money there?
Right. Yep. It's all amazing stuff. Also, do you have a log file analyzer or tool of choice?
Oh, there's a lot. I would say it really depends on your setup. I've used Datadog. I think DeepCrawl has a really strong tool. If you're independent, Screaming Frog, I hope they love that I shouted them out, because this is only my second time doing it. And I got fussed at last time I didn't. But Screaming Frog has a great log analyzer if you're more independent. If you're familiar with SEMrush, they've recently deployed their own log analyzer. I would say that that's for like mid-tier users. If you don't actually know how to format your log files, I would suggest against that. Spotify has a really good log analyzer, and they will set it up custom to your log files.
Oh, wow.
So will DeepCrawl. So I would say those are some big ones. And then,
so with DeepCrawl, and I know a lot of the folks there and mention them a lot on the show. I might be mistaken, but I thought for them, you could only use the log URLs as crawl inputs for like, hey, crawl these URLs and look for gaps. But do they actually do more than that with log file stuff?
So you can use a third-party integration that they have to actually do log analysis, and then they can format it and output it for you.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
That's the part where I think there's two components to log analysis, right? There's you and how you want to synthesize information for your business because you know that business and how it's structured. And then there's, standardized log analysis. Can I see URLs, how many times that they've been hit, and which bots I think have hit them, and filter those out?
Yeah.
The more simplistic tools, the ones that most people are going to be familiar with, like an SEMrush, even Search Metrics will do this. Those are going to be the ones that are formatting it for you. Spotify formats it really easily for you. But if you really want to dig in deep and get into the raw log files and do raw log analysis, Screaming Frog and DeepCrawl are going to be really strong for that.
Yeah, Screaming Frog's the one I use, but the headache of trying to just manage all of the files and the hard drives and stuff was tricky. So I want to pivot a little and talk about things around learning SEO as a practice, and some industry stuff as well.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, to segue into that, you're CMO now, but you very obviously are staying very up on a lot of SEO stuff as well. How do you continue to stay in touch with SEO? Is that just for you a personal time balance? Are you still playing around with it on the weekend? Like what's your way of, because you obviously are still really up on everything. So
yeah, I am our SEO. One of the things that I actually agreed to, like, it was part of my agreement to come over to Food Boss as a CMO, was that I wasn't going to lose touch with what I love. I love SEO. And the reason I love SEO is it's ever evolving. It's never stopped growing or changing. So it's one of the key components of marketing that never gets boring. Ways that I stay up on it. I listen to your podcast. Shameless plug there. Search Engine Journal. SMX, but really Twitter is probably my go-to source for who I'm following, who I'm listening to. You've got the lineup, hands down. But if I really, really need a nugget and I'm missing something, a lot of people will laugh at me, but I tap into Mike King. He gets bored.
Yeah.
And when he gets bored with things, he goes and he finds things too.
Yeah.
So you can get some like just fruitful nuggets. And the thing is that a lot of people are like that though.
Yeah.
I think that the people who started off with search as their core and have stepped away from it, we are so thirsty for that knowledge that when you turn back to the industry, you deep dive into everyone's tweets, you go into every nook and cranny you can find. And like I have a change detection monitor on Google search guidelines. I know Bill Solowski has one too.
Yeah.
A lot of us monitor the changes. And the minute I see a change, I'm digging into it and I want to know more.
Yeah.
I do the same with schema.org.
Yeah.
I want to know what new structured data is coming out. I think
you must
monitoring the core resources and monitoring the key people is the way I stay in.
You must follow the beta schema.org too. Yeah,
I do.
There's some good stuff in there before it goes to the official one. So a few things here. So when we chatted earlier, you talked about, you had some feelings on how some people out there, people in air quotes, some people say that SEOs can't be good at both technical and content SEO. I saw there was a discussion on Twitter. What are your thoughts on that? Is it possible for an SEO to be good at both tech SEO and content SEO?
Absolutely.
Where does this debate come from?
I think it's kind of, it's the debate of whether or not you play the black pieces or the red pieces with checker. Who needs the first move? It's more a misunderstanding across the lines because there's generalizations of people. It's like saying engineers aren't artists. In order to be a good engineer, a solution-centric engineer, every engineer will tell you they have to think through so many different models.
Yeah.
Content is not straightforward. Like you can't just talk about the topic. You really have to explore it and ingratiate yourself into it. Both sides have systems. Both sides are constructing something that at the end of the day, a user is going to use.
Yeah.
Right? I think that we're blindsided in the fact that because the approach to learning them is not the same, we've just decided that you can't learn both. But that's like saying that somebody who's left brain can't have right brain activity.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who have shown that you can be both an architect and an artist. It's not just building a building, it's building a building that both structurally is sound and beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that's what we as SEOs have to remember is that it's science and an art. And the scientific part is not just engineering. There's a science to writing. We all know that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If there's no climax, it's no fun.
Right.
And there's an art to engineering as well as writing.
Yeah.
Those two things have to come together. And that's, I think, it perpetuates the whole discussion around AI now.
Yeah. And
conversational marketing. And
I think you hit on something very interesting there because the writer that's not also technical is probably not the best writer, right? Or the engineer that is not a little creative or very creative is not the best engineer. So
too structured or too loose.
Yeah.
It's just not enough. You have to be somewhere in the middle sometimes.
And I forget why, but I was looking into the right brain, left brain thing, and I was going to bring that up. And you mentioned it as well. I was doing some research and actually realized that that had been debunked as a myth, which blew my mind as well. But maybe that's just perpetuating in people's minds is this idea of right brain, left brain, like you're either creative or technical, and it's rare for those two brains to talk. But I remember researching it, and they were saying that that's not actually how the brain operates at all.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a limitation today to say that, you can't be creative and do engineering because it's math. Do you know how many language-based languages there are right now?
Yeah.
there's a reason that people can become engineers after a boot camp. It's because they help you explore a different way of approaching how engineering works. It's not like old school CS classes where you're inundated with 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
So Y = 1. Now, what is the equation that it's not there anymore. Common language is programming language.
And one thing you mentioned too, to my surprise, because I go on your Twitter and you don't tweet a whole lot, but it sounds like you're on there a lot, lurking. And there's other people like that too. Like Justin Briggs is a fantastic SEO that used to be really much more active on Twitter years ago and blogging and stuff like that. And he's someone I think of, and there's others that like just don't tweet a whole lot anymore. So what do you think pushes people away from tweeting and sharing and being more, active in conversations in the SEO space?
I think I can speak for myself. I don't want to speak for the whole. A lot of people who meet me, I am spectacularly, seemingly extroverted. I'm good at having the conversation, but I'm very introverted. I'd say I'm an introvert extrovert.
Yeah.
For me, there's just a lot there. Like I can't understand how, if you're new to our space, you can digest it all. I love these kinds of intimate conversations because I think that when I can have a direct message with somebody like Martin Splitt or with, Mike King, I glean so much more than I do from following and reading and taking my own interpretation of what they're trying to say. And I think that a lot of people leverage things like Twitter to, see whether or not they want to have that conversation. But I think for me, once I understand that I want to have the conversation, I'm going to tap you on the shoulder and say, here's a question I have for you. And if you don't want to share with me one-to-one, that's okay. But it's not that I don't want to share the information. Anybody who's met me can tell you. If you ask me, I'll tell you. But if you ask me to articulate it in a single article, I'm going to tell you that I have to write a book. And if you notice, like some of the best right now are all writing books.
Yeah.
Because it's just a lot.
Yeah.
So I think Twitter can be overwhelming. Running after the feed can be overwhelming, but you can glean a lot for those who want to share in a more public format. For me, just tweet me and I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah. So, and while we're on that topic, what is your Twitter in case people right now want to look you up?
Chicago SEO Pro.
Okay. So it's not your name. So I'm glad I asked. Chicago SEO Pro. And then when we chatted earlier in the pre-call, we landed on the income gap as well in the industry. And this is present in pretty much every industry, with women's rates being lower and others of, other backgrounds being lower. So you had some interesting thoughts around improving this. And you also had some thoughts around the issues with these industry studies that you see, like the income studies where they put out a survey to figure out how much SEOs are charging. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that and share those with the audience as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think we box ourselves in a lot. I think that there's the push and the pull of everything. You and I talked a little bit about this, where there's the victimization of women because we don't make as much in the industry, because we've been taught not to ask for or value ourselves as much. But there's a lot of us who do. I think that part of it is the sharing of the conversation that these are the rates. I think that most people don't share that. I personally, I took it upon myself early on in my career to ask a man in the industry who I befriended early on, how much do you make? And I think, most people are like, whoa, you can't ask that.
And as far as the industry studies, like one thing I had brought up when we talked earlier was, so I have a friend in the industry who's a woman, and I realized she was getting paid a lot lower than me for consulting projects. So I was trying to offer some advice or just awareness, like, look, you could charge more And one resource that I shared with her was an industry income study. You had some thoughts otherwise as to why those studies might be flawed. I'd be curious to hear about those as well.
I mean, they're mostly around a certain group. They solidify and focus on those who are willing to share versus those who are not. And the conversations that are had, because we talked a little bit about this. It's easier to ask for certain things when there's a relationship.
Yeah.
Our industry is predominantly white male as SEOs, especially when you start getting into specializations. Specializations like mobile and technical. Yeah. Those are, I would say 90%, if not more.
Yeah.
And the thing is that how do you have that conversation around what is the income when there are no women in the market?
Right.
And if a man is willing to share his income, that's fantastic. But they're heavily skewed towards one grouping. Even more so, what I've realized, and I thought about this a little bit after you and I had our early stage chats, is there's two kinds of consultants a lot of times. They're catered towards different groups. When you're talking to an enterprise SEO, the consulting gap is a lot different than if you're talking to somebody who's working with small businesses.
Yeah.
So for me, I think industry standards are bogus. If you really want to know how much you're worth, set a goalpost. Because at the end of the day, one person could make more than another person because of their specialization, because they just asked for more.
Right.
They value their time in a different way, and they articulate it differently. And I wouldn't use an industry standard to value myself. My time is worth a certain amount to me, and I'm willing to give it if somebody's willing to pay me that amount. And I can change that at any given point, right? If my relationship with somebody is that of a mentor and I want to nurture them, I don't want to charge them more.
Right.
But if they can afford more, like absolutely a lot of people will charge more. So those numbers are skewed as well because your client base is skewed. So there's a lot of boxes around this where you're only asking certain kind of person in a certain kind of environment without understanding their client basis. And then we're creating that as what people should strive for, whether they want to teach or not, whether they want to build on relationships or not. And I think that's just, it's silly.
And I want to chat a little bit. You mentioned mentoring, and I want to talk a little bit about learning SEO and diversity in SEO, because one thing I think about is I had the opportunity recently to assemble a little mini team for a new client project that I'm working on. And when I really sat back and thought about it, the best performing team is going to be a diverse team of people of different backgrounds, different genders, etc. That's literally going to be the team that's going to get the best SEO results, in my opinion. I just think that's going to be the case. So there's so many reasons to invest in this, everything from it's the right thing to do all the way down to business. But one thing you had mentioned is because I'm approaching this personally from I'm trying to refer other people to speak for me when I can't speak, or to be a guest in a podcast when I can't do that. But you mentioned mentoring and providing this sort of education for others as a part of that solution. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing there in terms of mentoring and helping people learn SEO.
Absolutely. So I prefer a one-on-one approach to mentorship. I think that and I also participate in the Tech SEO women's group, but I think that when people are trying to get into speaking, things like that, you and I talked about, it's great if somebody wants to hand off their spot, but it's still a giveaway. It's saying, I think this person should do it instead of me. But the person reaching out was looking for a particular talent, something that you had. So why not pass that on to somebody else? Because when you refer another person, they still need to be qualified to replace what they thought they were getting with you.
Right.
And a lot of times our names supersede us. Like everybody knows you, Dan, right? You know why people are reaching out to you to speak. I finally learned, why people are reaching out to me to speak. But when you're trying to build confidence and help other people understand how they can speak, how they can get there, our stories and our backgrounds, because we didn't always used to be these people. Nobody else handed us the ability to speak. Nobody just walked up and said, you know what? Today, Dan, I don't feel like speaking, so you get to do it.
Yeah.
That's not what happened.
Yeah.
You worked hard for it. There were steps that each of us took that are probably unique to how we approached it, that if we mentor and we engage, we talk to individuals, it's as simple as somebody sends you a message. Like I got a DM from a gentleman on Twitter who he essentially asked me for a consult. Mm-hmm. He was like, this is the problem I'm having on my website. Will you help me, solve the problem? And I said, how about we, connect and have a virtual coffee? Him and I got on a virtual coffee, which he was shocked about. We talked for about 15 minutes. And I said, at the end of the day, why did you send me this message? And he told me all this stuff that he had listened to and watched about me and read. And I was like, oh, I'm super flattered. But what were you trying to get? And the first thing he said was, I'm really just trying to learn here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And whatever I can do to do better for my clients that I'm doing right now, I want to do. And I said, okay, set up 15 minutes with me each month.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And for him, I think he thought that was a big thing. But how many times do we waste 15 minutes in a day on something that doesn't matter when we could help somebody else?
Yeah.
And so I try and dedicate at least 1 hour every single week to the Women in Tech SEO group. And whether it's scouring Facebook to respond to somebody and not give them just I don't think about that, but illustrate that I've thought about what they're saying and give them a path to the solution. And if they actually want the solution, at the end of every single comment I make, direct message me or reach out to me directly so I can help you understand it.
Yeah.
Because we need to give people understanding for them to do better. It's not just giving handouts.
So if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, I would love to have a mentor. And by the way, I've mentioned United Search before as well on the show, and even gave them a quote unquote free sponsorship spot for 3 shows as well. So if anybody wants to check out United Search, it's a great organization. I actually have a mentor there as well now. And that's an option for people. But let's say somebody's listening and that's not an option for them, or they just want to maybe more informally find a mentor. Would you suggest they just cold reach out to somebody, or what's like a good approach for finding a mentor?
So I'm gonna use my content marketing hat now,
and
let you know that it's true. When you flatter someone, they like it.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the smartest people go on Twitter, ask a question at the people that you want to talk to, because it's not like they're unreachable. Right. And most everybody that you meet in the SEO industry, they're super humble, super down to earth, and they just want to help each other.
Yeah.
And so I would say, do a sidestep to a cold outreach, mention them in something and in the problem that you're having, and they're highly likely to respond as long as you articulate why you mentioned them.
Right.
That's the piece that I think a lot of people miss. If you went to Tech SEO Boost, because Dan, you reached out to me and we were talking, but you said, I don't know how I missed you. That alone sparked up our conversation. But if somebody asked and said, I looked at your crawl budget slides and I didn't understand this statement. Any chance you want to chime in on this, because I'm looking at these 3 questions related to crawl budget. And then you added me and a few other people. I've seen people from Deep Crawl respond in like minutes.
Yeah.
Because it's what we're passionate about. So when you spark our passion, you also stroke our egos a little bit because it's what we're also trying to be our best at.
Yeah.
So I would say that that's probably the best way to first interact and engage. And then if somebody doesn't answer your question, follow up with them and ask them why. Be forward.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's as simple as they weren't on. This last 2 weeks, I had Nava Hopkins, Jenny Hallis, and a few other people mention me in lists of women in marketing to follow if you want to get great results.
Yeah.
I apologize first and foremost for the fact that I haven't been on Twitter for the last 3 weeks because I took my COVID shot and I was sick.
Yeah.
But that's why, right?
Yeah.
I think that if you ask a person who's active and say, hey, I reached out to you. Sorry, I wasn't trying to, occupy your time, but is there a reason you didn't answer my question? They might just tell you, I didn't see it. Point me that way.
Yeah.
And they'll answer it publicly.
It is easy to miss things on Twitter.
Yeah. There's a lot going on. Twitter's fast.
If you get mentioned a lot. Well, it's been really awesome chatting with you for the interview. So before we wrap things up, you gave your Twitter, give that again, and then anywhere else that you want people to check out as well, if it's LinkedIn or even just Food Boss. So
I'm super easy. Chicago SEO Pro is my LinkedIn handle.
Yeah. It's
my Twitter handle. If you look for me for like JoriFord.com, I've got all of my information there.
Oh, cool.
I'm a pretty easy person to get a hold of. Same with Facebook. If you get on Facebook and you reach out and you want a friend's request me, as long as you give me some kind of a notification as to why, I'm probably going to say yes.
And so I know your slides are out there from Tech SEO. Do you have other SEO information that's been published or out there? Is it on your site? Because I'm sure people are going to want to check it out.
It's on my site. Usually if you look up Chicago SEO Pro, that's been the handle on most of my stuff. And I'm actually currently working on doing a better job of sharing because I actually got called out by one of my colleagues in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
He said, when you share, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It'd be better if you did it more often and we could resource it. So I'm going to do a much better job with on my JoriFord.com site, aggregating all of the content that I've shared over the years, but also making a concerted effort to publish at least once a month. Yeah,
exciting. Cool. Well, I'll have people go check that out. And thanks again for joining us on episode 122 of Experts in the Wire.
Thank you very much for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.